people, and hello mga kapepe. Today, we will be dealing about the educational context during the 19th century. But before anything else, we need also to define when is the 19th century. 19th century started in 1801 to 1900s. And those are the years that encapsulate in the 19th century. Our education before, it was poorly and unfairly administered. Some are selected few or indulge in this education, like the mestizos, like the families who are affluent in nature, who can send their children to school. Those who are with Spanish blood are able to educate themselves. Also, those materials are aligned to religiously dominated framework, meaning that largely benefited the Spanish colonial government at the expense of our Filipino people. That is why it feels so sad that education was took advantage by these colonizers just to implement their interests in it. Kasi we all know one of their interest was to promote Catholicism during that time. And it makes me feel so sad as well that religion was forcibly imposed rather than willingly accepted through education. Although there are some initiatives like the Royal Decree of 1863 that really pivots the story of the educational landscape here in the Philippines, making it a pioneer. Yeah, it is safe to say that this legal framework became a catalyst in education. Also, there are some organizations, political organizations, that really promote the education as well as reforms in the education, like the La Liga Filipina, which founded by our pambansang bayani, Dr. Jose Rizal. And those are our overview for now, and my group mates will explain further the structure, some challenges.
Here's the overview on the Rizal's perspective. First, structure of the educational system. The Catholic Church controlled the educational system in the Philippines, aiming to convert the population to Christianity and enforce obedience to colonial authorities. At first, modern public education system in Asia was created in 1863, but many schools focused on religious instruction, neglecting subjects like science and mathematics. Primary education was compulsory but heavily influenced by religious teachings. But while secondary education was largely a privilege for the wealthy, the curriculum emphasized Spanish language instruction and Catholic teachings. Second is ability and accessibility for social classes. Education in the Philippines was disproportionately distributed among different social classes, with the rich, particularly Spanish descendant mestizos, having access to prestigious schools and higher education opportunities. Native Filipinos or Indios were often limited to basic literacy and religious instruction in parish school. Urban versus rural disparities further exacerbated the socio-economic divide, leading to limited formal education and perpetuating poverty and limited upward mobility.
Condition of women's education during Rizal's time. Women's education faced significant barriers due to societal norms and colonial attitudes. Initiatives like the Royal Decree of 1863 were limited and often inadequate, with most opportunities reserved for affluent women. The women of Malolos, who challenged the notion that women were homemakers, petitioned the colonial government for night schools for learning Spanish. Despite their efforts, systematic barriers and conservative opposition limited their access to higher education and societal participation. So, in short, women nung time ni Rizal's faced many obstacles to getting an education and participating in society. So, sabi nga na ang mga kababaihan nung time ni Rizal is talagang unfair yung treatment sa kanila. So, tignan pa natin kung ano pa yung mga barriers na naranasan ng mga kababaihan nung time ni Rizal, which is so these are the challenges faced by women in accessing education. So first is economic barriers. So economic factors, particularly in lower income families, often prioritize male children's education over females, viewing daughters to education as less beneficial due to future domestic responsibilities. So nung past, many people believe that women didn't need education because ang pinaka main job lang nila is taking care of the home, maglinis-linis sa bahay, alagaan kung raising children. So yun lang talaga yung parang pinaka main job lang daw talaga ng babae is kapag pag natapos silang mag-aral is magiging main job lang nila is mag-alaga ng bata, taking care of home, mga asawa nila. So, ganun ang treatment noon. So, they thought women wouldn't need to learn things like reading, writing, or math because they wouldn't be working outside the home. This idea limited women's opportunities and choices in life. So, walang choice ang mga babae noon, kundi yun talaga. Kasi, yun naman talaga ang treatment sa kanila noon pa. Next is cultural resistance to change. So, women's education movement faces cultural resistance from conservatives and traditional gender roles, with cultural stigma and reluctance among families to support daughters' education aspirations. So, in the past, women had limited access to education. So, this meaning lang nito is fewer school for girls. Education was mostly para lang sa mga mayayaman na pamilya. Pag hindi ka mayaman, mahirap ka talaga makapag-aral. So, boys were often favored over girls. So, mas pabor sa kanila yung mga lalaking mas pabor talaga yung lalaking nag-aaral kaysa sa mga babae. Mas nahirapan din dito yung mga babae na maghanap ng mga trabaho kasi nga syempre hindi sila naturuan, hindi sila nakapag-aral kasi talagang boys lang yung gustong ang parang pinakapabor na dapat makapag-aral or makapagtapos. So next is religious constraints. So during Spanish colonial times, the Catholic Church heavily influenced educational curriculum, prioritizing religious instruction over critical thinking and secular subjects, leading to patriarchal ideologies. So during Spanish colonial times, the Catholic Church rather controlled what was taught in schools. So the focus was on teaching religion and obedience. Critical thinking and other subjects like science, math, and history were not prioritized. So yung Catholic Church is sila lang talaga yung nasusunod kung anong gusto nilang ituro, yun yung gusto nilang ituro. So this led to a patriarchal society where men held power and women were seen as inferior. So talagang mga lalaki lang talaga ang nakahawak ng power, or kumbaga sila lang talaga yung nasusunod. Limited education and opportunities for women, gaya na sinabi ko kanina, and culture that emphasize obedience and tradition over independent thinking. So in short, the Catholic Church influence on education during Spanish colonial times reinforced patriarchal ideas and limited critical thinking and education. So talagang malakas ang impluwensya ng Catholic Church nung time ni Rizal. Kumbaga sila talaga lahat yung mga nasusunod, or kumbaga sila yung may mas power, kung anong gusto nila, yun na lang talaga nasusunod. Next is economic barriers. So, economic factors, particularly in lower income families, often prioritize male children's education over females, viewing daughters' education as less beneficial due to future domestic responsibilities. So, ito naman, so sa mga ibang pamilya, especially those with limited money lang, boys education is prioritized over girls. So mas yung mga lalaki mas prioritize na dapat sila yung makapag-aral, and girls education is seen as less important, hindi importante yung pag-aaral ng babae, because they're expected to stay at home, mag-alaga ng bata, kagaya nga nung first kanina na nasabi ko. And this means that many girls from poor families are denied education. So hindi talaga sila nakapag-aral yung mga babaeng nanggaling sa mahirap na pamilya, limiting their future opportunities. So limitado lang talaga yung future nila kasi nga hindi sila nakapag-aral, at saka syempre mahirap din sila. Next is cultural resistance to change women's education movement faces cultural resistance from conservatives and traditional gender roles, with cultural stigma and reluctance among families to support daughters' education aspirations. So some people, especially conservatives, resist change and believe women should focus on sa mga traditional na mga roles, or like homemaking, lang sila talaga sa bahay. Think education will make women less feminine or less obedient, afraid of women gaining independence and power. So natatakot silang mas magkaroon ng power yung babae, kumbaga afraid of women gaining independence. So natatakot silang magkaroon ng freedom yung mga babae. And this cultural resistance stigmatizes families who support girls' education, makes families hesitant to educate their daughters, limits girls' opportunities and aspirations. So, sa madaling salita, cultural resistance hinder girls' education due to outdated beliefs about women roles. So, itong cultural na ito talagang naitatag na noon pa na talagang ang mga babae talagang dapat nasa bahay lang sila. Dapat yung mga katangian ng babae dapat dun lang sa bahay. Yung role lang dapat nila na pang babae, hindi talaga dapat sila dapat nasa school. So, yun yung mga napagdaanan ng mga kababaihan nung time ni Rizal. Unfair treatment kasi hindi parang boys lang ba dapat ang kung kaya ng boys, hindi ba dapat kaya ng girls? And especially to Catholic Church na kung hindi nila pinaprioritize nila yung mga boys over girls, tsaka kung anong gusto lang nilang ituro, yun lang yung mga naituturo nila.
So, dumako naman tayo. So, okay, tapos na tayo sa challenges faced by women in accessing education. So, ang dami-daming challenges na face ng mga women. Kaya ngayon, ang dami-daming, kaya ngayong panahon natin ngayon, they want women to be empowered. Kaya nga we have women empowerment. Unlike before the 19th century, only men were being empowered. Kaya nga ngayon nabigyan ng mga babae ng karapatan na mag-aral, nabigyan sila ng karapatang bumoto, at anuman ang mga karapatan na meron ng lalaki, meron din ang mga babae, di ba? So, dumako naman tayo sa mga women of Malolos in advocating for education. So, as we all know that yung mga babae, simbolo yan ng katapangan, simbolo yan ng tenacity, and they are the instrument in towards promoting women's education. So, their acts inspired future generations to carry on the battle for equality and empowerment, since they not only sought to secure educational access for themselves, but also symbolize a larger struggle for women's rights in the Philippines. So, sabi ko nga kanina na hindi lang ang mga lalaki ang dapat na mai-empowered, kundi ang mga lalaki rin. So, kaya ang sinisigaw ng mga women sa Malolos or during Malolos period na women empowerment, kasi nga hindi lang nito pinapaglaban ang karapatan ng mga babae na makapag-aral, kundi ang karapatan ng mga babae sa lahat ng karapatan sa Pilipinas. Yun lamang po at maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Move to the Royal Decree of 1860. Through the establishment of a public school system, the standardization of curricula, and the recognition of the importance of female education, the Royal Decree of 1863 played a crucial role in reshaping education in the Philippines. Its effects endured through subsequent educational reforms and played a significant role in the evolution of Philippine education, ultimately contributing to increased social awareness and movements for women's rights and educational reform. The Royal Decree of 1863 marked a turning point in Philippine education by establishing the first public school system. It required every town to have schools for both boys and girls, making education more accessible beyond the elite. This decree also standardized curricula and emphasized the importance of female education, which was a significant step toward gender equality. Its long-term impact included increased literacy, social awareness, and the foundation for later educational reforms. Ultimately, it contributed to movements for national identity, women's rights, and the intellectual growth of leaders like Jose Rizal. This decree raised the social awareness among Filipinos. In short, ang Royal Decree of 1863 ay hindi lang simpleng batas. Ito ang naging simula ng mas inklusibong edukasyon sa Pilipinas na nagkaroon ng epekto sa kasaysayan, kultura at kalayaan natin bilang isang bansa. Now, let's try to compare the education system between 19th and 21st century based on its structures, teaching methods, language of instructions, and methodology. So, the structures during 19th century is primarily available to the elite class, with a focus on religious instruction and basic literacy. Schools were often run by religious institutions, while on the 21st century, it is more inclusive and aims to provide access to education for all, regardless of socio-economic status. So, in terms of structure, in the 19th century, education was limited to the elite and heavily influenced by religious institutions. So, schools prioritize moral and religious instruction alongside basic literacy, often making education inaccessible to lower social classes. In contrast, 21st century education is more inclusive, aiming to provide equal opportunities for all students regardless of economic background. Governments and institutions have implemented policies to ensure universal access to education, promoting lifelong learning. So, in teaching methods, during 19th century, it was teacher-centered with a focus on rote memorization and discipline. While in 21st century, there is a shift towards student-centered learning, encouraging critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration among students. So, teaching in the 19th century was largely teacher-centered, where students were expected to memorize lessons and follow strict discipline. So this approach emphasized obedience rather than understanding. Meanwhile, 21st century education focuses on student-centered learning, encouraging critical thinking, problem-solving, and collaboration. Modern classrooms also integrate discussions, group work, and interactive activities to engage students more effectively. So next is the language of instructions. During the 19th century, Spanish was the primary language of instruction, while in the 21st century, Filipino and English is being widely used, reflecting the country's cultural diversity and global integration. During the 19th century, Spanish was the dominant language in schools, reflecting the colonial influence of Spain. This limited accessibility for many Filipinos who spoke native languages. In contrast, 21st century education embraces Filipino and English as primary languages of instruction, making learning more inclusive while also equipping students with global communication skills. So the last one is the methodology. So during the 19th century, it relied on traditional methods with limited resources, while in the 21st century, use of digital tools, online resources, and interactive learning platforms enhanced the educational experience. Educational methodologies in the 19th century were traditional and relied on limited resources such as books and oral recitation. Teaching was rigid, with little room for innovation. In the 21st century, education has been transformed by technology, incorporating digital tools, online learning platforms, and multimedia resources. So these advancements make learning more interactive, personalized, and accessible, even beyond the traditional classroom setting. In summary, education has evolved significantly from the 19th to the 21st century. It has shifted from being exclusive to inclusive, from rigid memorization to interactive learning, and from limited resources to advanced digital tools. These changes have made education more accessible, engaging, and relevant to modern needs, preparing students for a rapidly changing world.
And now, we will be moving on to the significant educational events during the 19th century. So, to begin with, we have here the early 19th century. So, there are so many established schools, pero ang mga nag-aaral lang are mga mestizos, mga elitista, mga may kaya, mga affluente. Ganon ang mga nag-aaral dati. And the curricula were limited only sa religious doctrines and rote memorization, meaning the learning process was repeating the information again and again until ma-ingrain sa someone's memory. So basically, ang example natin dito is yung na-adapt natin ngayon is yung mga yung repetitive prayers during Sunday masses. Yung mga Catholic dyan. Ganun, di ba? Minimemorize natin hanggang sa ma-memorize natin. Ganun din yung mga message ni Father, except sa humiliha. Ganon. Come 1863, a legal framework was coined. It was called the Royal Decree of 1863. It was the effort of the Spanish authorities, not our kababayan ha. So, this decree was somehow pivotal as it establishes formal public education systems, and it mandated one primary school for men and one for women sa municipality. But I think this was a strategy ng mga Espanyol para ngay mas mapabilis nila yung pag-disseminate, pag-spread ng kanilang impluensya as well as their interest to spread Catholicism. Kasi kung madami ng mga estudyante doon, mas mapapabilis nila yung pag-i-inculcate ng Catholicism. Galing din nila, di ba? Ang Royal Decree, it somehow work as a chain smoke para sa kabuang, para i-hide yung kabuuan nilang balak. Di ba? Ang galing. Come 1865, the establishment of Manila Observatory Institution. This was founded by Jesuits, yung mga sugo ng mga Espanyol. This institution is to contribute scientific education and research. And in the Philippines today, it is still intact sa establishment na yon. And come 1884, recognize siya ng Spanish authorities as a weather forecasting institution, and it serves its purpose today, and still existing pa rin ang Manila Observatory Institution. And come 1871, the opening of medical and pharmacy schools. We can see here that there is a step forward sa mga friars in terms of their strategy na mag-provide ng formal training for aspiring healthcare practitioners. And in the late 1870s to early 1880s, an increase of enrollment. Tignan nyo, with the influence that Royal Decree of 1863 brought out, dumami na ang mga estudyante na pumapasok. Pero it doesn't really eradicate the discriminations, the limitedness of the curricula, and especially the inequalities that this education has brought out to the educational landscape. And 1880s, there is a rise of Ilustrados, and it will be spelled as ILUSTRADOS and never a double L. So these Ilustrados are those enlightened ones when it comes to Spanish term ha. And yes, they advocate educational reform dito sa atin for national rights. And Yes, yes, Jose Rizal was one of the key figures or notable figures with this organization, Ilustrados. So it promotes nga, sabi ko, educational reforms. And this can be strongly agreed and reconcile yung advocacy ni Jose Rizal. And come 1887, the publication of Noli Me Tangere ni Rizal. So this highlighted the societal issues related to education and colonial rule in the character of who sa Noli Me Tangere? In the character of Crisostomo Ibarra, kasi, di ba, he wanted to establish an education wherein Filipinos can go there and be educated once. Bakit? Ang mga mestizos, ang mga full-blooded, mga Spanish lang ba ang pwedeng mag-aral? Kami rin, ganon si Ibarate. Mga ganon. So, reflecting the struggles of the Ilustrados and their quest for reform, it became a crucial text for promoting awareness, the need for educational and social reform. This also deeply resonated dun sa nobela ni Rizal, The Noli Me Tangere or Touch Me Not. So basically, it's an eye-opener how the friars try to constrain the movement as well as the initiative of some Filipinos who wants an education reform. Andun pa rin sila. So, in 1892, a foundation of the La Liga Filipina. It is a political organization that one of its key figure as well is Jose Rizal. This organization has its prime agenda or goal, and it was to unite Filipino and to promote reforms including the educational improvements. Kasi they are already opened about how cruel, how oppressive the colonizers are in terms of their education. That is why they wanted to unite Filipinos and yes, call out the ruling race during that time. Also, lastly, 1867. It is a disheartening event for Filipinos back then because it marked an end of the life of Jose Rizal. He was executed and later ultimately died. So, with that in mind, it reawakens the nationalism within the Filipinos' heart, and they wanted to spark change. And you know what? Andres Bonifacio was once inspired by his writing, and it ignited the spirit of nationalism within him. So, with these significant events, it really reflects how our country in terms of education revolves over time.